News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Laugh. Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into the things that have got you talking. And firstly, I must lead with something big, something for which you probably should be seated. And if you're comfortable, I'll begin. For I bring you news of a bombshell, ladies and gentlemen. A bombshell that has the blood of the media pumping faster than would a double dose of Viagra. One that has sparked a frenzy. Are you ready? Pippa Correa, the political editor of the Mirror newspaper, has shared a bombshell image with us today, and that is a direct quote. It's Boris Johnson in a work office, and there's tinsel, Prosecco, and even some crisps. Yeah, sorry about that. It's a ridiculous build-up. Not a bombshell after all. Now, let me be clear. I stuck to the rules and was personally deeply affected by them. Hospitalised for a month without a single visitor, and my baby in intensive care without the support of both me and his daddy. So my heart goes out to anyone who was not allowed to say goodbye to a loved one or be with someone who needed them. I understand the devastation. These rules were inhumane. But the very pain of these people is now being weaponised to further a political agenda. And I'm sorry, but I reject that. Because if this was indeed all about an understandable and genuine concern that we suffered inhumane rules while they parted, then this information would never have even been contained for so long. So tonight, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to refrain from dissecting the bombshell and instead focus on other news like COVID and the NHS, Brexit, the politicising of school children, and more. I'll of course return to the conduct of Boris Johnson when there is a meaningful development to report. But for now, let's get on with the latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Just after 6 o'clock, your top stories. The Prime Minister says he expects to end all coronavirus restrictions, including the need for people to self-isolate, a month early in England. Boris Johnson told MPs today he'll present the government's Living with COVID plan after parliamentary recess later this month.
Provided the current encouraging trends in the data continue, it is my expectation that we will be able to end the last domestic restrictions, including the legal requirement to self-isolate if you test positive, a full month early.
Boris Johnson. Well, the Met Police say it's reviewing its decision not to probe a number 10 Christmas quiz after the new image that Michelle was referring to just then emerged in the British newspapers. Well, in other news today, the UK national terrorism threat level has been reduced from severe to substantial. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, said that means an attack is likely rather than highly likely. The threat level was increased in November last year, a day after the incident outside Liverpool Women's Hospital, which killed the bomber Imad al-Swalmin. In international news, the Prime Minister will fly to Poland tomorrow over the build-up of Russian forces on the Ukrainian border. Boris Johnson's due to meet the Poland Prime Minister and President to reassure them that Eastern European allies have the UK's support. Earlier today, the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, landed in Moscow to meet with her Russian counterpart. She said Russia must immediately withdraw its forces and respect Ukraine's sovereignty or face severe consequences. Well, Priti Patel has reduced the threat level in the UK from severe to substantial, and she said today that the threat level was increased due to the bombing that took place outside the Liverpool hospital. I think we've already done that story, sorry. A man serving life in prison for killing his fiancée in 2016 has been convicted of murdering his first wife 6 years earlier. 61-year-old Ian Stewart has been found guilty of killing Diane Stewart at their home in Cambridgeshire in 2010. Her death had been treated previously as epilepsy-related, but police started to investigate after Stewart was convicted of the killing of the children's author Helen Bailey in Hertfordshire in 2016. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has accepted the apology of the Junior Health Minister, Gillian Keegan, after she admitted continuing an in-person meeting despite finding out she'd tested positive for COVID. Posting on Twitter, Ms Keegan said she was listening to 3 fathers who'd lost their daughters to suicide when she found out her positive result. She says that with their consent, she stayed for a short period to hear their stories, but realised it had been an error of judgment. Sajid Javid said he continues to support her in her role. Virginia Giuffre will be interviewed under oath by the Duke of York's lawyers in April as part of her civil claim against him in the United States. Ms Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew for damages, claiming she was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein to have sex with the royal when she was 17 over 2 decades ago. Prince Andrew denies the allegations. He'll also give evidence under oath in a deposition on March the 10th in London in what's been described as neutral conditions. Now, the cats belonging to the West Ham footballer Kurt Zouma are now in the care of the RSPCA. Zouma apologised yesterday after a video surfaced online of him kicking and slapping his cats. The RSPCA say they're investigating the incident. West Ham Football Club has fined their player, and the sportswear firm Adidas has ended its sponsorship deal with him. Scientists say they've made a huge step closer to making nuclear fusion energy. Experts say recent experiments demonstrated the potential to deliver safe and sustainable low-carbon energy. Fusion energy is based on the same principle by which stars create heat and light. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Now more from Michelle and Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. I've got to say as well, listening to you then, Polly, great news about that moronic Zouma having those cats taken off him. That is good news in my mind. I would personally, though, have liked to seen him be banned from owning animals going forward. As I said on my show yesterday, anyone that can treat an animal like that at the best of times, there's something not quite right with them. But to do that knowing that you're being recorded, I dread to think what you do when you don't think you're being recorded. Anyway, keeping me company on my panel tonight, we've got Peter Whittle, who's the director of the New Culture Forum, Mo Lovett, who's the national coordinator at Debating Matters, and Kevin Craig, who's a Labour councillor and the CEO of PLMR. And you know the drill on Dewbs & Co by now. It's not just about us here and our thoughts. I like to know what's on your mind at home as well, so you can get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GB News. Now, our top story, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, said this afternoon that all remaining COVID restrictions in England, including the legal rule to self-isolate, could end later this month. Now, under the current rules, anyone who tests positive must self-isolate for at least 5 days. Of course, though, if you're unvaccinated and you come in contact with anyone who's tested positive, then it's 10 days. That doesn't make sense to me either. Nonetheless, the current restrictions are due to expire currently on the 24th of March. And Boris Johnson has told MPs that he's expecting that these rules will end early as long as cases continue to fall. Gotta say, I think this is marvellous news. But what do you think at home? And Peter, what's your thoughts?
Well, like you, I think it's marvellous news. Not a moment too soon, Michelle. We're not the first, actually, to do this. The Netherlands, I believe, and Denmark stopped all restrictions about a week ago. I think we've got to as much as possible, start to put this terrible 2 years behind us. I think the fact that they're coming off early, I think is a great thing. And yes, it's good news. It's good news. Who can not think it's good news?
Well, I suspect that some of you at home might not think it's good news. I know I actually saw a very powerful tweet from a lady who said, you know, everyone's celebrating this is good news, but I've got a 9-year-old disabled daughter and I'm terrified that this might put her at risk. So whilst I do indeed think it's great, I also appreciate that there's lots of people that perhaps might be a little bit nervous about this. Kevin?
Yeah, I think you're right, Michelle. It's, and as has just been said, it's great news. Long time coming. We've waited for it, and the Prime Minister, can have that moment, and he, seemingly like you from the top of the show, will hope that the good news and us finally moving forward will make us all forget that while we were obeying the rules, he was having party after party, and he also wants us to forget that 10 billion quid was wasted up the wherever it was on PPE. So great news. We're moving forward as a country. Share concerns for people with disabilities and health conditions. Let's not forget them as good citizens, but let's not forget there are major mess-ups in how this whole pandemic was navigated.
Yeah, I suspect that we'll find that there will have been. I am quite excited. Well, did I just say that sentence? I'm quite excited about a government report. Maybe I'll pare that back a little bit, but I am quite interested and intrigued, should I say, rather than excited, about when this public inquiry is going to happen, what it's going to contain, and I suspect, of course, there'll be lots of things that could have done better and differently when we get that. But then, to be fair, though, Kevin, faced with a pandemic, this was a situation that was unfolding at a rapid speed. Of course, there'll be things that could have been done better and differently.
I just think you're being too kind to Boris, Michelle. We locked down too late. He gave us rules that nobody else. I just think, he's getting an easy ride off you today.
This is so wrong, sorry, but there's been a major report came out, it's been reported in all the papers from Johns Hopkins University in America, saying that lockdown made almost no difference, like
was it 0.2%? Yeah.
To the death rate. Of course, everyone regrets deaths, but to whatever degree, whichever country had lockdown, the end result has been roughly the same. However, what we have had, or what we will soon find out about, is the extent of collateral damage.
There's no doctors on this panel, right? And I don't think there's any medical agreement of opinion on what you've just raised. I think there's also consensus that we locked down too.
There is not. There's no consensus.
Can I just come in here? There may be a political consensus in certain points, but we talk about the Spanish flu, right? There is still research being done 100 years later. We can debate this and we can have reports about this forever, but the two things that have really upset people that I know, one, the illogicality of some of the rules and them not being able to use their own agency and their own practicality to manage the pandemic safely, and the collateral damage. Like, look at the NHS waiting list now, because we spent ages focusing only on one virus and the deaths from one virus.
Well, look, you probably don't want to get stuck on this again, Michelle, because we've done this before. But I think that today is good news. We can agree on that, right? But I think huge mistakes were made, and today's good news should not allow, in my opinion, the mistakes to be ignored. And I don't think we're going to agree. I think that the lockdown and those measures stopped the NHS running into the ground, which again you probably don't agree on.
No, it's not a question. You can't just see it through that prism.
Why not?
I mean, no, you can't.
Why not?
The fact
wards didn't fill
how
up.
Many cancer operations were delayed? The wait. I think we're going to be talking about the NHS later, but the waiting lists now are not going to clear until about 2024, something like that. The fact is,
no, it's not that they're not going to not clear till 2024. They're going to keep rising for the next 2 years.
But I think one of the things about the NHS, though, is that we applied this kind of blanket rule across the country. Hospitals where I am were sitting empty. I was meeting nurses and hospital porters on my dog walks in the morning that were saying, we are just waiting, right? Because the pandemic was raging in London and the hospitals in London were overwhelmed. They weren't where I am and in other parts of the country. So the idea that we just stopped everything to focus on this one thing. I agree with Michelle, in the early stages of the pandemic, when we didn't know who was going to be impacted, who the vulnerable people were, I agree that mistakes could have been made. But we learned that fairly early on, and we kept repeating the same mistake.
But do you honestly believe, though, Kevin, that it would be possible, irrespective of who was in charge and what colour the government was, do you actually think it would be possible to have dealt with this pandemic and there not to have been some mistakes have been made along the way?
No, because I think that the political debate is too full of people who say that whatever particular party they support is infallible. I don't buy into that. I think governments of all colours make mistakes. But please don't ask us to be whooping with joy that this government wasted 10 billion quid on overpriced PPE, which could have built over a dozen hospitals that the government likes to talk about. This Prime Minister doesn't pay attention to the detail on almost anything until his back's against the wall and his job's at risk, in my humble
Let me just ask you
PPE
that.
was brought in by Labour, you might originally remember. It was actually a Labour thing.
Yeah, but not these contracts.
Yes, but
Matt Hancock's mate down the pub who used to...
Hang on, we're out about two different things. I think one of you is on about PFI and one of you is on about PPE.
Yeah, he is. I don't know why he's brought that up.
Look, I mean, the thing is that the fact is I don't have any allegiance to any particular party. I mean, you know, I'm certainly not a fan of Boris or whatever, but the idea that this was... What we can't let happen is this kind of narrative that somehow if we had lockdown sooner, than that basically things would have been much, much better. Absolutely not. I think that the damage that has been done through lockdown is immense.
All right.
And I think there will be a reckoning.
Don't you think that we can agree, though, or do you disagree, that had we locked down earlier, fewer people would have died in this country? Do you disagree with that?
No, it's not...
Do you disagree with that?
Yes, I do, actually.
OK.
Yeah.
Right.
No, because that is not a self-fulfilling thing, the argument you're putting there. It's a non sequitur, you said. I mean, the fact of the matter is that when you look at Sweden, when you look at other countries that did not lock down like we did, there has been roughly the same rate of death as here. And that goes the same. The trajectory of the virus went pretty much the same in every country, right?
Yes.
Whatever the stage that they locked down to.
But the biggest mistake we did was putting COVID-positive old people back into care homes. That was a huge percentage of the deaths. And, you know, the nosocomial infections in hospitals was another huge percentage of the deaths.
Right.
So I'm all for an inquiry. I don't think the government have done this perfectly at all. But on lockdowns, I'm more in line with Peter. But I still think the government's got a lot to answer to, yeah.
But Kevin, as well, just on your point about pushing that the government should have locked down earlier, because one of the things that I found very frustrating throughout this pandemic, and don't get me wrong, I was as frightened as the next person at the start of this, not least because I was pregnant and none of this was known, and it was scary. And, you know, I was into kind of staying at home, and I wanted other people to stay at home and all the rest of it. But one of my frustrations was so much of the media in all of these press conferences, which we'll all remember, these daily press conferences, it was always, why didn't you lock down sooner? Why aren't you locking down harder? Why aren't you locking down faster? Even now, when all of the things that we know about COVID and the emergence of Omicron, we were having the press conferences, and when he was talking about lifting restrictions, the journalists were still saying, well, how do you know it's safe? Why should we come out of lockdowns? Do you concede that there are enormous consequences? Currently, I would say immeasurable consequences, but we will feel them for years, if not decades, whether it's mental health, the decimation of businesses, some sectors. I mean, how some sectors will recover from this. The NHS, you talk about protecting the NHS, and we should have locked down early to protect the NHS. These lockdowns and the focus on COVID only have brought the NHS to its knees.
Well, I concede a lot of what you said, but I am just making the point that I don't believe in the early stages and decisions on PPE procurement, the government got it right. To be fair and balanced, around Christmas, I think it was a good call, right? This year, it was done differently with a light touch you're probably more in favour of. But I do think it's fair to challenge the idea that just because it's a great news day today, that we forget about some of the huge errors that some people think have been made. And I think we're going to be debating it for a long time to come. And I don't dispute, anybody who's considered could not dispute your point that, of course, there have been other collateral damage, of course.
Yeah, huge. And I worry that we're going to see this collateral damage, this consequence for years, probably decades to come.
Yes, I think they think about 10 years things will become clear.
But it's easy, isn't it, for all of us to sit here as Captain Hindsight and pontificate on how it could have been done differently. The sentiment and the perspective that I have is if you are at the helm of the ship, if you are Boris Johnson and you are trying to navigate your way through this at the time, it must have been incredibly difficult.
I think he did a good job then.
I think, can I just...
Michelle,
can I,
one sec.
Do I think he's done a good job?
Yeah.
Well, if I look at where we are now and we're coming out of this and some of the key decisions that he's made some very good decisions. Do I think that he could have done things better? Of course. But then I think that anybody that would have been steering this ship could have done things better with the benefit of hindsight. And I think it's unrealistic to suggest that any government with any leader of any colour, of any persuasion, could have done this without making some pretty not devastating, but some big mistakes along the way.
I think, Michelle, one thing's worth saying.
Make it a quick point, Peter.
Yeah, there are going to be a lot of people. There are going to be a lot of people who actually don't want to let this go. One has to say that.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of people who actually didn't exactly like what was happening, but they kind of, their whole instinct is about
to a new norm.
Just kind of keep going. You know, on Saturday I was in a restaurant, and there were still people that they sit down and have their meal, and they get up and they put a mask on. I mean, that's one of the ridiculous things you were talking about, I think. You used to think, why are you doing this now? Why are you still doing it?
Well, I'll tell you a topic that I want to get into, maybe tomorrow, depending on what happens in the news agenda, but I want to get into what's going on in schools when it comes to things like masks, for example. So many schools in England, in Scotland, well, right across the country, I think, are still insisting on mask wearing for children. Many of you will know my views already, but I think it's appalling. But I want to get into that subject separately because I think it deserves attention. Kevin's laughing at me, but I think it's a very serious topic, masking up children for hours and hours on end. But anyway, I'll hold my thoughts. I'll contain them until tomorrow. Hopefully I'll get a chance to do that topic. Going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk about Brexit because some MPs have urged the government to be honest about the cost of Brexit. Has there really been zero benefits? We'll be discussing that next. And by the way, I look forward to this next conversation because on my panel, I've got someone that was quite passionate about remaining and someone who was quite passionate about leaving. So it'll be a good conversation. I'll see you in a few minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Now, just before the break, I was talking to you about the lockdown restrictions And I was asking my panel what they thought about the isolation laws being scrapped, the rules being scrapped at the end of the month. We're running a poll on GB News Twitter, asking you, what do you think to that? Do you think they should be scrapped or not at the end of the month? And so far, nearly 90% of you say yes, you think that they should be scrapped. Right, let's move the conversation on. Oh, Danny, by the way, on Twitter said these things should have been scrapped months ago. Colossal waste of money. Jonathan says, well, I voted yes on Twitter, but not really. It should have been lifted 2 years ago. Jonathan, stop confusing my poll results. Jane says, certainly for the asymptomatic, but if you've got a temperature and a hacking cough, stay at home. See, Jane, that's the good old days. That's how it used to be. If you were ill, if you were sick, you'd stay at home. What a breeze of common sense to return to those days. If you're ill, you don't feel great, just don't go to work, don't go out. And yeah, who knows, maybe life might get back to normal one of these days. I cross my fingers and I hope. Anyway, let's talk about Brexit, shall we? The old B word. It's been over 2 years since the UK left the European Union, and the leave versus remain debate rages on. This week, the government has been urged by a group of cross-party MPs, led by Dame Meg Hillier, to be honest about the cost of Brexit. Many businesses are finding the paperwork and border costs, and meaning profits, are being cut. A report by the Cross-Party Public Accounts Committee found that trade has taken a hit by the withdrawal. The report said that the only detectable impact was the increased burdens on businesses. But I do have to point out, there has, of course, been the small matter of us being entirely gripped in the midst of a global pandemic for the entirety of those 2 years. But hey-ho, details, eh, Kevin?
Well, you know, Michelle, I'm feeling slightly lonely on this panel
Oh,
this evening.
no.
I am, yeah, because I think I'm the only person who was a passionate believer that we should have stayed in the European Union, and I supported it in all sorts of ways. But you see, I think it's important that we're reasonable in these debates, and I do take your point that Brexit really, in many ways, hasn't been able to be tested because of the pandemic, right? But as I look around me in my business life, my family's life, I see not a single benefit to date of us voting to leave the European Union. I know my fellow citizens voted to do it. We're a democracy, so we respect that. But I see no benefits, and perhaps there might be some people near me who can help me with that.
Peter?
Well, I think it's quite fair-minded of you, actually, to say that that you respect the result, because for quite a long time, well, for about 3 or 4 years, no one respected the result, at least those in positions of power.
But you know how right you are, though, on that, because Nigel Farage, who's on later, himself said if it was close as it was the other way, there should have been a second vote.
No, well, anyway, that's very old stuff. Come on. I mean, the fact is, when you say about the benefits of Brexit, first of all, I'd be the first to agree, right, that when it comes to our borders, we can do that now, but the point is that you do need the political will to do it. You need the political will to do it, and frankly, that seems not to be there. All these new kind of restrictions on trade or bureaucracy on trade that's been put on, for example, I'm totally with Lord Frost on that. We shouldn't be doing that. I agree with that. But the most important thing is that you cannot just look at Brexit in terms of the economics. That was the real problem Remainers made, even during the referendum. It wasn't just about that. It was about sovereignty. It was about basically being independent. I think those things are simply there. They might take a while to basically adjust, but they are there. And I think, as someone who was right at the very heart of the Brexit campaign, in 2016. Frankly, I have no regrets about it. And also, interestingly, I think the majority of people who think were right to come out, particularly after the experience of COVID and what happened with the vaccine and all of that in the EU, they actually, there are more people now than there were, say, maybe 3 or 4 years ago who are pleased that we've come out. So I think that the benefits aren't immediately visible, because they're not all economic.
Well, maybe there aren't any.
I don't know.
No, there are.
I never thought it was going to be easy to leave the European Union.
Exactly.
Actually, I always knew it was going to be quite difficult. I mean, the hardest part was getting the political class to actually agree to that popular vote that 52% of us voted for. That took us 4 years. It's not Boris Johnson's Brexit, by the way. It was people that voted for that, and people who held the political class to account every time they refused to kind of honour that vote. So that was hard work, but that was a victory for voters, I think. But, what it has done, Kevin, is I think it has exposed the political class and how shallow they are. It's kind of like rolling back the curtains in The Wizard of Oz and seeing how terrible our parliamentary system is working. So actually, in a sense...
What do you mean? Sorry, Mo.
What's going on in Whitehall and Westminster? Do you think that's a functional... Do you think we've got a functional parliamentary democracy?
Class. That's a dysfunctional Prime Minister, isn't it?
Well, I think it's on both sides of the benches, I'm afraid.
No,
I don't just... When I have these debates, I don't even just talk from my own... Let me get word in, Kev.
Sorry, Mo.
I don't just talk from my own perspective. I do take soundings from people I talk to all the time. And, genuinely, one of the things that people say to me all the time is we've got one of the worst political classes they can remember in history, and that's a problem. And I think you can only solve a problem when you see that it's there. And that was the big thing about accountability when you've got a government in Brussels, governance from Brussels, and you've got governance from Westminster. It's too easy to put things in the cracks in the middle and have nobody held accountable. And that is democratic, and that's why sovereignty has been amazing.
Look, I take that. Look, the vote is done, right? And so that happened, and that was democracy, right? Much as many people didn't like it. But what we're talking about today is a cross-party group of MPs, Conservative and Labour, are saying it's not working, business is harder. Brexit's not delivered any benefits. That's not me, by the way. That's what Michelle said.
Yeah, but let me be clear about this report, by the way, because one of the things that I find a bit peculiar about this is, so this is a report looking at the impacts, as we just said, cross-party. The MPs on the committee have said that it was clear that EU exit has had an impact. Well, yeah, obviously it would have done. But then it goes on to say that it was extremely difficult to quantify the impact of the pandemic on the problems. So I kind of sit there and I go, hang on a second. So it's extremely clear that the EU exit has had an impact. And of course it would be clear. I don't need a cross-party group of MPs to tell me that if you take yourself out of a huge setup, you're going to have implications. You don't need to do a deep and meaningful report to tell me that. But then on the flip side of that, they don't seem to be able to make such a clear statement that the global pandemic has equally had an impact.
Yeah.
And that raises a little bit of bewilderment, shall I say, for me, because then I think, what is the objective of that report? Because if you really want it to be balanced and fair, you'd be noting that both things had an impact. And actually, everything, you throw all your balls up in the air, they're going to need to settle, and to settle takes time, and Brexit was a long-term strategy.
Well, what do you think is going to happen? Because, to be fair, you also were a passionate leaver, as I recall. Mm-hmm. And I said earlier, as we know, that the pandemic, I think, has suspended in some ways normal political life, and I think we all agree on that.
Yeah.
So there hasn't been a time to... I'm just keen, I'm hoping that our lived experience is going to be noticeably better in this country in 2 years as a result of Brexit, because there's a commitment in Parliament to respect the result. But I'm just, for me, the jury's out.
Well, to side with Kevin a little bit here, one of the things they've talked about in this report is the increased burdens on businesses and the red tape and all the rest of it. It doesn't come as a surprise to me, I have to say, with the technocratic class that we've got in power at the moment, that they're still not able to release themselves from that kind of protectionist bureaucracy that we had in the EU. So it doesn't really surprise me, but that's a good point. That was one of the benefits of Brexit, is that we would remove a lot of this bureaucracy, all these layers of administration and the red tape, and I think the report does helpfully point that out.
Yeah, I think you've really got to remember, when you talk about political class, and you're absolutely right, is that, they were all basically ranged against leavers. It wasn't just Parliament, it was the whole media and political class on the whole. And despite that, and despite all the things they said would happen which haven't happened, that's worth remembering. Like, we were going to have an immediate terrible recession, we were virtually going to have World War III, Mars bars would suddenly disappear, I don't know. Everything everything was brought out. Everything was brought out. Despite all that, this was an extraordinary, wonderful democratic rebellion by a majority of people. And many Labour supporters,
yeah, of course,
also, they stayed with their own. They trusted their own wisdom in the face of all this hostility, and I think that we should always treasure that. I mean, you know, democracy now really abides with those people and not the people in Westminster, so far as I'm concerned.
By the way, lots of you are emailing and tweeting in saying, Michelle, why didn't you tell Kevin he's just asked for a benefit? Why haven't you pointed out we've rolled vaccines out well before others in the EU did? I've got to say, about 20, and that's just what I can see, about 20 of you have said that, and I'm sure there will be more of you. I'm sorry I can't read them all out, but your central point was definitely coming through loud and clear. I'll put that to you. Vaccine, briefly though, because I do need to move on.
Yeah, the vaccines we as a country got right. And I think anyone who doesn't say that is churlish. And
do you concede that Brexit was probably one of the key reasons we move faster on that topic?
No, I don't. And I think this is. No, you can sniff and you can do all that. But the detail of actually how we approve vaccines, I'm not sure that Brexit is made a material difference to that. But it's great that what we did on vaccines. I think that was more to do with Dame Kate Bingham being a powerhouse and knocking heads together.
I think we did all right, but the European Union
it
did
is very
absolutely
interesting.
dreadful.
But it's very interesting when some people see an obvious benefit of Brexit that it's not seen as an obvious benefit of Brexit to people like yourselves. But anyway, we could talk about Brexit for a very long time, and I suspect that we will in the coming months, weeks, years, God only knows how long. But for now, I want to talk about something else instead, because the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, has condemned a lesson. This is a very strange story, by the way. This is a lesson that took place in a Nottinghamshire primary school where Year 6 pupils were asked to write a letter criticising Prime Minister Boris Johnson. I shouldn't laugh, but I do. I just genuinely think it's absolutely ludicrous. Teachers have been accused of indoctrinating Year 6 pupils by getting them to write letters over the Partygate scandal. The 10-year-old pupils from Welbeck Primary School can be seen proudly holding up the letters, supposedly written by themselves and sent to local MP Lillian Greenwood, attacking Boris over breaking the COVID rules. This letter, I mean, you can't read that, I've got to say. If you can read that, you've got better eyesight than me, and I've got my spectacles on. But there's quite an in-depth letter on the screen there, and that's been written. Apparently, I was just trying to get a copy of it, because even with my glasses, I can't read that on the screen. But it's a very strange letter. It's apparently written by a small child. And, I mean, if that is indeed written by a small child, you want to get that kid enrolled into Mensa, if you ask me, because I don't know any small children that write as well as that. Anyway, Mer, your thoughts on all of this?
This has really incensed me, right? Because somebody who's got political passions, political beliefs and all the rest of it that I'm very proud to kind of come on television and talk about. I also teach politics, and I can leave my beliefs and my opinions at the door, and that's exactly what a teacher should do. They should know what's the difference between knowledge, concepts, beliefs, ideas, and they should leave their own political beliefs at the door. This has really annoyed me because it's letting children down. Children need to have an intellectual discovery of their own, not be force-fed their opinions by the teachers. These are the kids,
by the way. These are the kids proudly sharing their letters. I think this was on the school's Twitter feed. They'd posted these pictures very proudly. I've got to say that Twitter feed has since been deactivated. Kevin?
The school said, though, and I think it's in the Daily Mail article, the school said we don't instruct the children in what political opinions to have, excuse the grammar, right? Didn't they? They said that. They said that it's actually, we don't tell children what to think. But it was an exercise, you know, in creative writing and letter structure. And maybe, I always think, listen to the next generation. Maybe the kids in the class just happen to agree with the 70% or so of people who think that Boris Johnson's getting it all wrong at the minute.
So you don't think this is weird at all?
Well, I remember once going to a very lovely, posh, independent school, which I'm, you know, very supportive of as part of our education system. And it was when I was a Labour parliamentary candidate, and the kids absolutely killed me. You know, I got beaten up. They all, you know, you felt like you were going into to get really done over. And I just think that this story is being blown out of proportion.
You see, this is where I disagree with you, because I've worked in schools a lot. I used to work in arts in schools as well, and it happens all the time. It was terrible around the referendum. It really, really was. And I think, you know, I think this is really like letting children down. You know, they have an intellectual journey to go on themselves. They need to be supported and encouraged by their teachers. I mean, I used to do freelance tutoring, and quite often the parents would come to me, and they were lefty parents. You know, I live in the northeast, right? And they would say, can you give some extra lessons to my student, because I don't think their Labour supporting teacher is giving them a balanced view of left and right.
Yeah, but as an education expert, Moses, sorry to cut across, as an education expert, how do you know that the kids actually don't think, oi, Prime Minister, why are you in there having the knees up?
That really isn't the point. That really isn't the point.
But it is the point.
Of course it's not.
Well, it is.
How old are these kids?
Year 6.
Look,
Year 6. So what's that? Is that about 10? 11?
The fact is, I'm not surprised at all by this. In fact, it's only the thin end of the wedge. Because, look, it was a couple of weeks ago, perhaps you discussed it, Michelle, on your programme, but there were kids down in Brighton who were going to be taught about the fact that they weren't racially innocent, for example. This kind of agenda, that the woke agenda, I know it's not about Boris now, but is going right across the education system, not just state schools, but private ones too. And parents are basically wondering, can they take their kids out of particular classes about identity politics at the age of 6 or not? This is a real worry. And in fact, my concern is the fact that the Education Secretary is so flaccid on this and so kind of weak on it. I mean, the educational...
What do you want him to do then? What action would you like to see in response to this outrage?
The educational establishment is getting more and more left-wing. There is no question about that. I mean, that's what's got to be tackled. That is what's got to be tackled.
See,
this is just a very, very crude
I'm not sure
example.
governments can. I'm not sure governments and legislation. It's the same with the free speech debate. You know, if you've got no culture of free speech in schools, then you know you can't just get the government to impose a duty of regulation on schools. It has to be within the culture. I think education has become so instrumentalised now. Though it's not about the joy of learning. It's not about knowledge transference. It's not about dealing with intellectual concepts. It's been instrumentalised in all sorts of different ways, not just in a political way, and I think this is part of it.
Well, I think it's a bit bleak, that analysis from both of you, and I think there's great, exciting things going on in state schools across the country and independent schools, and I think this is just getting out of hand, this one story.
No, but it's not just one story, as I just said. This is one story, and it's a very blatant, and it's a very party political one. Right? What I'm talking about is the general way in which now, it's not about, for example, imparting our culture and our history to kids, particularly. They come out sometimes really ignorant of those things. It's actually about making sure they line up with a certain ideology.
Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. I don't think that the schools are pumping out kids to only think one way. That's not my experience.
No, I think that would be to overstate it. No, I agree with you that, and I'm not saying there aren't brilliant...
Well, that's what he thinks. He thinks that.
But this is going right across the whole educational system.
I think it's a perceptible trend, and if you care about education, you need to be aware of that perceptible trend and then look at how we can do it, because that is essentially failing kids, right? If we want kids to create a better future for themselves, you know, there's no point kind of just downloading your ideas onto the child. They need to learn to have intellectual curiosity for themselves.
As you said as well, by the way, going back to Brexit, during that whole referendum thing, it was really tough if you know, you were from a Brexiteer family.
Well, not if they got the Telegraph. Anyone, you know, they were happy in a Telegraph
you're being
house.
frivolous about it.
But according to the Daily Mail, you pointed out the stories in there. According to them, the head teacher of this school, they've found tweets that she's apparently put up where she's using hashtag Tory scum, things like that.
I hate that.
I find that slightly inappropriate. Let's be honest.
Pretty much par for the course, isn't it?
No.
That's what they think.
But irrespective of what party anyone's in, the idea of calling your fellow citizens scum because of their politics, outrageous, wrong, always.
But a lot of people on the left do that.
Well, a lot of people on the right are as bad, you know.
Such as?
Are they?
Well, I mean, very relaxed about the Prime Minister chucking out broad statements about Keir Starmer and Jimmy Savile.
Oh, come on.
Hang on, I've got to pull you up on that. The whole Keir Starmer thing, this is again, you're saying that you don't like things being sensationalised. The point Boris Johnson was trying to make, albeit he made it slightly clumsily, is that ultimately the buck stops with you as the head of an organisation. In the same way that everyone reckons the buck stops with Boris Johnson for these parties that he wasn't even at, the buck stops with him apparently for being head of that organisation. That's the point that he was trying to make, albeit slightly clumsily. You're saying it's the same, the left and the right. The left, the left, what makes me laugh about the left, by the way, the left is supposed to be... Yeah, well, it's the left. If I think about the left and how they make out that they are, they're inclusive, they're nice, they're kind, except when you have a difference of a political opinion. And then often, so many people there, and I experienced this, by the way, because I ran against Labour. I've got first-hand experience. And it was vile. It was disgusting, and it makes me laugh, all these people with their hashtag be kind, while simultaneously writing hashtag Tory scum and all the rest of it. Anyway, I'm being told I've got to go to a break. Don't even get me started on how vicious I think some of the left can be, and the hypocrisy of it, by the way, because it's the left that reckon that they're the good guys. Anyway, as I said, better not get myself started on that one. We'll do that as a topic in another day, I reckon. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, the BAFTAs. Did you see what Adele said about I love being a woman? Well, according to some, she's received a backlash. Did I just call it the BAFTAs? Did I call it the BAFTAs?
The Brits.
I meant the Brits. I'm thinking about the BAFTAs because I'm thinking maybe we might be up for one at some stage, but the Brits is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about Adele. She said she liked being a woman. Apparently she's got a backlash. Did she? Really? Was there anything wrong in what she said? Or is it just people overreacting or the world going mad? I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. I'm very conscious that some of you are listening to us on the radio, perhaps, rather than watching. So to you, here's a quick reminder of who my panel are keeping me company tonight. We've got Peter Whittle, who's the director of the New Culture Forum. We've got Merle Lovett, who's a writer and researcher, and Kevin Craig, who's a Labour councillor and also the CEO of PLMR. There you go. Lots of you getting in contact with some of the topics we've been going on about tonight. I'll try and read some more of those out before we leave, but I want to squeeze a couple more stories in. It's 10 to 7 already almost. How time flies, doesn't it, when you're having fun? Let's talk about Adele, shall we? She won big at the Brit Awards last night, picking up 3 out of the 4 main prizes. She won Best Artist, Best Album and Song of the Year for Easy on Me. But it wasn't just her awards that's got people talking. It was the first time that the Brits has a gender-neutral category, scrapping the separation of male and female categories, to which Adele said this.
Never lose sight of why you are who you are. The reason people are into you is because of something you have in you. Don't ever let go of that, ever. Yeah, and also, you know, I understand why the name of this award has changed, but I really love being a woman and being a female artist. I do. And I'm really proud of us. I really, really am. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, go Adele. Now, according to some media, she's faced a backlash for her comments. So I tried to find the backlash, so I did. Didn't quite manage to find it. I saw a few randoms on Twitter, most of them anonymous, saying that she's a TERF or a transphobe or whatever, and that they were never going to spend another cent, I tell you, a cent on her music ever again. But I didn't find that much outrage. And by the way, why on earth would anyone be outraged at that? No, I love it.
I think you're right. I think people are into the culture wars, aren't they? People love the culture wars. And if there's any chance to kind of create some kind of outrage or storm where it's not necessary, then people will kind of jump on that. I think I'm a bit cynical of why the Brits have done that. I mean, I was thinking about recording artists when I grew up, you know, Prince and Madonna. I just thought of them as fabulous recording artists. It didn't really matter whether they were male or female. But we do have this conversation around what is a woman. And it's not a conversation around what is a man. It is a conversation around what is a woman. And that is part of the culture war and the non-binary stuff and the kind of gender-neutral stuff. It is focused around women. And so that's why, if potentially people are getting their heckles up about her statement, it's because it's become a contentious thing to say that you're an adult human female, that you're a woman. It's become a contentious thing to say. And that does have real-world implications. So it's not just a Twitter storm. But I think you're right about this one. I think, you know, I haven't seen a lot of backlash myself. But the reason that there could be is because it is around this concept of what a woman is.
Yeah, I asked a couple of people their views, people that are probably a little bit more kind of, I don't know what the word is, young, right on, work, whatever it is, I don't know. I asked them what their thoughts was about the whole woman, biological sex, gender, and they were quite uncomfortable, even getting into the subject with me. They were like, oh, God, it's like, you know, you say the wrong thing. And why has it become a subject to almost fear to have a normal conversation about it's almost become unsayable that there is a biological male and a biological female, and the two is different, and then you have something different to biological sex called a gender. Why is that such a difficult thing to say?
Well, sorry,
Peter, go on, you tell me.
I'd say, first of all, that, you know, it's not like it does seem sometimes that the world's gone mad. People might say that. It's not actually, it's just Western countries, actually. This doesn't play in huge areas of the world. It's just not even a thing. I, like you, Mo, I think women are essentially under attack. I'm astonished, actually. You know, when you see things such as people who menstruate, right, for example, in official documents, pregnant people, you know, people not being able to bring themselves to say the word woman. What the hell is going on? As you say, men are totally unaffected by this.
Peter, you saying, just to ask you one question, sorry to interrupt, but you've made me interested in it. You said it's a bit of a Western problem. Yep. Are you suggesting that we should look to the Middle East and China for where we take a lead on women's rights and how to deal with these issues?
But I would say this is absolutely nothing to do with women's rights.
Well, where's getting it right then? No, the Western are getting it wrong. Where's getting it right?
No, because I think it's all part of I'm afraid to use the term again, culture war, which is basically enveloping the West at the moment. America, Canada, Britain. That's where these things are mostly happening. And so we are talking, obviously, about culture wars. I don't think Adele was, I would agree with you on that, I think Adele, was making a point, but I wouldn't say any more than that. She's not making a huge cultural warrior point. However, what she said is worth saying. How did we get to this point? Where the word woman is now being written with an X, instead of just woman or women. This is, I would say, it's a form of cultural Marxism that's happening, actually.
I think the fact that there are regressive countries laughing at so-called Western countries is a bit problematic. On this issue, you've had Putin, you've had China, you've had even Afghanistan, the Taliban, wasn't it? They were laughing at some of our ridiculous culture wars. So I think it's a regressive trend that's happening in Western society at the moment, and the fact that other countries are laughing at us speaks volumes.
We're almost out of time, so Kevin, I want your thoughts.
Well, Adele, there is no backlash to her. She was just celebrating being a woman. She said, "I understand why they changed the categories." Right? She said that. So basically, whether we like it or not, there are people in our country, society, who don't feel comfortable in the gender they were born into, right? And they nowadays...
Gender or biological sex?
Oh, God, hang on.
Yeah, no, come on. Whether or not they feel comfortable or not.
This, for me,
you don't change the whole of biology and science just because a few people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, but, OK, well, what Sam Smith, the artist, right? He's one of these. He's a Brit winner, and that's one of the reasons they've changed.
Yeah, I know, but he's just an attention seeker. No one takes
Is he?
that. Of course.
Sam Smith
calling
is an
himself they.
seeker.
I mean,
right.
Come on.
So you think that... So just to be clear, every young person who's going through issues like this is an attention seeker, in your opinion?
No, I think there's a voguish element to it. They think it's kind of cool. And I think, I hear that anecdotally for people at school. Yeah, absolutely. I think far more seriously is the way in which women are... The whole idea of womanhood is being degraded.
Well, I think the idea of womanhood will not be degraded on Dewbs and Kerr, not under my watch.
Well
I can tell you that. That is all I've got time for. I'll be back tomorrow, 6 o'clock till 7 o'clock. Have yourself a good evening. In the meantime, thanks for your company and thank you to my panel. Good night.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin. Welcome to your latest update from the Met Office. Some wintry weather across Scotland, strong winds and some snow flurries as well. And across Northern Ireland, it could turn quite icy tonight. There's a cold front across the south of England. That's bringing a bit of rain and drizzle here and there. But it's further north where we've got the cold air already, and the combination of these weather fronts and this area of low pressure that could bring some pretty nasty conditions to parts of Scotland. We do have Met Office yellow warnings in place. Snow and strong winds combining to make blizzards. So some pretty grim travelling conditions across Scotland, travel disruption possible, and ice is a big hazard across Northern Ireland, where the showers will continue here. Elsewhere, apart from a bit of drizzle on the south coast, most of England and Wales will be dry, not quite as mild as recent nights, but still for most above freezing. But the wintry weather will still be there in the morning across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Ice for Northern Ireland, the combination of strong winds and snow across parts of Scotland, particularly the higher routes. Some travel disruption likely, but even through the central belt, it will get very windy, and the winds themselves could cause some disruption. But certainly the combination of snow and strong winds making for some pretty grim travelling conditions during Thursday. A few showers will affect Northern England, where it will also be blustery. Much of the south dry and bright. Temperatures around average, feeling colder in the south compared to recent days.